Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about global inequality. Just to get a general understanding of how we should perceive this, again, we're going to be looking at this from a sociological perspective. And generally, with sociology, of course, we're starting with the macro and working our way down to the micro, whereas in psychology, you might start with the small and work your way to the big. And I don't know if that's accurate, because again, with sociology, you can come at it from all kinds of directions. But since we're really starting with a macrocosmic perspective, I'm just going to start out with the big picture stuff and work my way to the tiny details. So again, in order to understand global inequality and where we should start, I mean, my first question is how far do we go back? So we could go back like the history books talk about. There was a surplus, and then civilization began to stratify, and people began to specialize, and we started to leave the farms and just subsistence farming, and started creating these urban metropolises, in which everybody did different social roles to make society function, and then as a result of the dividing into social roles, these then got ranked hierarchically, and that's kind of the beginning of conflict and inequality between groups as some specialized and became more wealthy or more powerful or have more higher status than somebody else. And you could look at it like in the sense of pharaohs, having power over the people, or in the sense of kings having power over the farmers, or the monopolistic Rockefellers over the poor Irish working class, or whatever it might be. Um, but I guess a good place is to start again with that initial dividing of society, the division of labor, okay? And then the resulting inequality because we divided into labor and then different roles got hierarchically ranked in society. And those who had more elite social positions, they had more power than people that didn't have elite social positions. So begins social inequality where there's the haves and the have-nots, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, or if we look at society globally, like a stratified, hierarchically organized class system, a good question is, do we all live in a capitalist class system? I mean, again, not that every single economic, you know, organization on our planet is capitalistic in a sense, but since the age of colonialism, is society looking more like that? That we all live in a class system, and where we're ranked within this class system dictates our social location or our socioeconomic status, which gets us life chances. And so, what we're really talking about, and when we're talking about global inequality, is look at the world as a whole and say, where are people located in society along that class lines? Are some on the top, some in the middle, and some on the bottom, and then it's just distributed throughout? Does it look like a pyramid with the 1% at the top and then, the working class on the bottom? And does this pyramid hold up globally? Is it like that in every single country? Is there less inequality in some places than others? And so again, there are a lot of exceptions to what we're going to talk about. And you could say that like America has a great wealth distribution that might not be the case in other countries. But still, if we compare country to country, or just look at society as a whole and ask who has all the power, who has all the money, historically in the Western world, it's like white males have had the power, or in Latin America, the landowning bourgeoisie, or wherever you are, power is distributed in different ways. Sometimes it's the corporations that have all the money. Sometimes it's the government that has all the power, like in China or somewhere in Russia, which is a blend of oligarchs, blended with the power of the government. And so every place is a little bit different. And so again, we could talk for days about, the convergences and divergences of inequality globally from country to country, and then delve deep into each country specifically to look at their inequality. But again, for this lecture, the purpose is really just to take a global stance and ask, is there global inequality? Do some groups have more power than other groups? Does that affect life chances? Do some people live longer, for example, because they have access to healthcare and other people don't? Do some people's countries only make $1,000, $1,500 a year while some people are making $65,000 a year? If we look globally, the people in the United States, the average American makes $65,000 a year or so. And if you compare that to any other country, the average American makes $20,000 more than the next country closest to us, which is like Germany and England, where they make, 42 to 45,000 US dollars every year. And so if you look at, global inequality like that, is the United States the 1%? Absolutely. Even the poor in the United States, the homeless, have more access to food than people in other countries. There are food shelters everywhere. If you're homeless in the city, you can always go find a church in the morning and get some fresh clothes and some soup. Again, even though America is very capitalistic and there's a lot of inequality, and we don't necessarily have great social programs to support the poor, it is definitely a pick yourself up from the bootstraps, laissez-faire kind of country in a sense that we don't have as many social programs as like somewhere in Western Europe, for example. But at the same time, we do have a surplus where we can feed the hungry, and those options do exist. And there are grants and government money and private donations and things that support all of these community services. But again, in other countries, what we can access from a community service, people could only dream of. And so it kind of puts things in perspective of like what's it like living in America, the opportunity structure, your access, is it different here than it is in other places? And again, I mean, I'm a sociologist. Volunteering in a homeless shelter is just, it's important to probably have those experiences just so you can understand and relate where people are coming from, especially when you're talking about these kinds of things. But, I remember going there and like the grocery stores the next day, they donate a lot of food and stuff like that. So, I mean, I was great to see that. I wish there wasn't poor in America. And of course, ending poverty through education or whatever it might be is a great thing to aspire to, but we have to recognize that we have some poverty and homelessness and reasons for many reasons in America. And, we do have some social support programs, but other countries, kids starve on a daily basis, and that affects their overall nutrition. Kids are malnourished, that affects their brain growth and their brain development. And so, again, there's so many things that we have to consider here. But if we're going to talk about global inequality, again, we're going to look at it maybe as a country by country basis or look at the world as a class system and ask the questions. How does it look? What are the patterns? Who has what kind of socioeconomic status? What's the demography of income across the world? Okay, and your book talks about a lot of these things. So your book opens up talking about system inequality between social classes and countries. And again, it exists. If you just look at the average income of someone in America versus someone in China, average American $65,000 a year, average person in China $7,000 a year. There's a reason that American companies send our cotton over to China to be made in a t-shirt by someone in China and then ship back here because it's cheaper for us to send our cotton to China, have a Chinese person make it into a t-shirt, and then ship it back to America than it is to actually pay an American to make that good. And so again, global inequality exists. Just look at income disparities from country to country. According to your book, the top 1% of the world control 45% of the world's wealth, which is estimated at 360 trillion, quoted by your book. And again, 1% of the people have like almost half of the world's wealth. Is that fair? Do they need that much money? At some point, should we increase the taxes, or is that the way we want it? Should we have incentivization so that, capitalists can consolidate power into the hands of the few? Is that good for society? There's a lot of opinions on this subject, but again, should there be a cap and how much the, wealth distribution should exceed? I mean, is enough enough? Is there too much? While there's kids starving, if the 1% didn't have as much money, would there be less kids starving? It's just a question that you have to ask. And again, America's great because you don't need a revolution to change things. You can just change the tax code. Like right now, the wealthy 1% in America don't pay taxes. Just look at their tax returns. They have all kinds of ways of getting around things. They really just operate at a loss, and that's how they pretty much avoid having to pay, even though they have assets up the wazoo. So there's a lot of tricks and techniques that you can use for the rich in America to get around having to pay taxes, for example. But again, that's the way it is. Do the wealthy have all the power? Have they been consolidating wealth into the hands of the few for a long time? It's just basic conflict theory. Global inequality is defined as the systematic difference in wealth and power among countries. So again, your book is looking at it in a countrywide distribution. You could look at it with continent-wide distribution. Or again, like I'm saying, you could just look at the world as one big giant hierarchically distributed class system and ask, what does it look like? Who has what? How is the wealth distributed? Is it fair? Is it equal? Does every kid go to the same quality school? GNI is defined as the gross national income. So again, when we're comparing global inequality, one variable is to look at income. Um, the book states that higher income countries are considered where you make over $12,000 a year per person. In America, we make 6 times that much. Again, we are the highest income country in the world. Your book defines upper middle class countries as people that make 4K to 12K, lower middle 1K to 4K, and then the lowest income countries as less than $1,000 a year. And so again, there's a reason that American countries, put plants in these other, countries to have things made, because you can pay someone what, less than $1,000 to make your shoes, and then you come over here and sell it for buku money and make billions of dollars, and all the stock makes money. So again, when you had that whole thing about like sweatshops and stuff like in the 90s, and holding Nike accountable and holding Starbucks accountable so that they don't take advantage of the farmers, for example, that's the world kind of stepping in and saying, enough is enough, corporations. You can't exploit these laborers as much as you have been doing, and so that's what's up with that. So is global well-being improving? Again, if you look at the per income of the world, yes, it has been growing. And it could just be that, as we left the farms, went into the Industrial Revolution, you ended up with this great disparity between countries and who was developed and who wasn't. And so those countries that weren't developed as much, but the farming way of life had kind of gone away and their population started to boom, but they didn't have the infrastructure to really be able to deal with that kind of a society, might not have been as well off. Like if you look at Africa, they lack that basic infrastructure. They might have the raw goods, but they don't have the machines and the organizations to be able to take that raw goods and make it into something and then bring that to market and then create a capitalist economy themselves. And so later on in the book, in this chapter, it talks about, should we push these countries to become developed, as we would call it, or is that just, cultural imperialism where we're forcing our culture upon somebody else? Where we've seen the biggest increases again are in these high population, high density countries that didn't develop or industrialize. Again, these are just such ethnocentric words to call a country underdeveloped because they haven't, like, what, created this capitalist system that created this carbon influx into the atmosphere, which is now killing the planet. So again, if you look at global warming, for example, global warming wasn't really a thing because it was really just the Western world that was polluting it, and it wasn't as high until China and India were finally released from their bonds of colonialism, and then they started to engage in manufacturing and what we would call developing, building society even bigger, becoming techno advanced. That's when you saw the really big carbon emissions start to kick out. And so that's actually an interesting story, is because the person who actually invented the steam engine, for example, was from India, but then Britain, who owned India, controlled it through force and violence and oppression and colonialism, etc. They wouldn't let the Indian people own their own steam engines. So they actually blocked India from developing for hundreds of years, or 100 years, I guess, just because they didn't want them to have power for themselves. But then once they couldn't hold on to India anymore following World War II, and they ran out of money and they had to give it up and let Gandhi and the Muslims versus Hindu kind of war that results after that. That's when you really start to see the growth of China and India. The income starts to go up as more manufacturing, more jobs become available, but then also the carbon and influx into the atmosphere also grows at that same time as a result of these developing nations. We should understand the difference between absolute poverty and relative poverty. Absolute poverty is not having the basic needs of survival, and then relative poverty is how are you surviving compared to those around you. So in America, you have people that are extremely poor. We would call that relative poverty, but even them, they can go get some food at a food bank, whereas people in other countries don't even have that option ever. And so again, that's But people in America also, what if they don't have access to that food bank? Then they would be in like some sort of relative poverty, you know. So again, I can't assume that even the poorest of the poor in America will have some access to food because that would be inaccurate. And I mean, that's just really sad that that would happen in America, this place with so much surplus, but of course it does have that. The capabilities approach is something your book talks about, and it asks, do you have the means to achieve your dreams? If you're so focused on Maslow's, lowest level of just survival, are you really able even to push yourself and to go to college, to even have access to college or access to a good job? Can you even achieve what you're trying to do? And so again, that's another way of looking at global well-being, Just because your country is developing, does that mean you have access, or are you still stuck in the lower classes with no way out? Um, just some theories on general global inequality. Why does it exist? Again, from a functionalist purpose, what's the purpose of inequality? Again, we need some kind of incentive to be able to motivate people to take these elite social roles. And again, so society therefore is distributed into unequally distributed social roles. And so not everybody can take one of the top roles because, there's only so many roles at the top and there's a lot more roles at the bottom. So it serves a purpose to have some inequality for that reason. But then conflict theory would come in and be like, look, yeah, okay, maybe we need a little inequality for incentive, but is there too much? Like, does the bourgeoisie, the owning class, those who have the means of production, have all the power, and all the poor people don't have any power? Should it be more fair? Should we balance it out where we tax the rich more so we can have a better education system for those kids in poverty, so that we as a society can produce more Albert Einsteins and Lydia Sebastians? Symbolic interactionism would say we're the one who created this world where inequality exists. We're the one who built this society. We came up with capitalism. We're the ones who have been dividing in society into labor, into social roles for thousands of years. This isn't the only way to build a society, but this is just the way we've been doing it for a while. Then you have the neoliberalist theories that just say basically let the markets run free. Don't let government intervene. If there's global inequality, things will just work its way out. Modernization theory, lower ranked countries should embrace European culture. Again, that idea that they should assimilate to a European imposed way of life, is that even fair? And why would we impose that culture on somebody who maybe doesn't want that? I mean, again, how great is this capitalist world we live in? Do we like it? Are we happy with it? Could it be better? Questions to ask. Global commodity chains, we are now all globally interacted, and so we're all interdependent on each other. Core, semi periphery, periphery theories, like you have those more advanced series, countries that have the big infrastructure and they're pretty much post-technological. Then you have like your industrial and technological countries in the middle that are, have some means of production, but really they're supplying a lot of labor to those industrial countries. Then you have your periphery countries, those are the poorest of the poor. Again, these are kind of shown on the map. Red is your periphery. Purple is kind of like your semi-periphery, and then blue is your core nations who have all the power. I mean, is that the way the world looks? And then world system theory says that the way the world looked during colonialism, where these European and Western powers were imposing their rule over other people, they were implementing a capitalist class system in every country, and then they were forcing people to basically come and work for them to make profit for the bourgeoisie. Does it look like that now? It's just something to ask. So again, capitalism, we always talk about this a lot when it comes to economics, but capitalism again is a system in which the goal of it is for those in power to consolidate wealth into the hands of the few and remove competition. And so the goal of capitalists is to gain all the capital and then block others from being able to access your capital. Again, how much money can you get? And through capitalism, you then have to sell your labor in order to get capital, in order to become an owner. And then if you're an owner, you then have to pay capital in order to get people to work for you. Then there's that balancing act between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat as to how much the bourgeoisie is willing to pay and how much of this the proletariat willing to work for. And then that's when you see kind of the worker strikes if they can't agree, or that's. So we've had a long history of capitalism and that conflict between the workers and the lower class and the upper class. So again, what are the effects of global inequality? Why are we talking about it in the first place? Should we just let the system go? But again, if you look at health, for example, you're going to find that it's unequally distributed. Like women are 22 times more likely to die than men globally because of babies and lack of access to health care. I mean, women die as a result of what happens to their bodies during pregnancy, and then not having the health care to boot, whether it's in childhood or through labor or through the life, that accounts for that disparity in women dying more than men. I mean, is that the way it should be? Should we build a world in which the 1% don't have all the money, and maybe we build some hospitals so that less women die in countries that don't have the infrastructure, for example, or even in the countries that do? And so if you look at mortality rates, how long people live, for example, quality of health, nutrition, you see great disparities between countries. Again, some people have food and access to a high quality diet and some don't. Same thing with education and literacy. If you look at why the number one thing women prostitutes, for example, have in common is that they're illiterate. And, literacy is associated with being able to be taken advantage of and be exploited. And same thing with the lack of education. Again, if you can help people get an education and learn how to read, that is power. That with that, they can get access to get skills, to get better jobs, to get wealth. But again, do you live in a country where you have access to education to get you that job, to get you that money? Is it fair where you live? Is it like the US where anyone can go to college as long as you can find a way to put yourself through college? You know what I mean? Other factors for global inequality: are we trapped in a cycle of high levels of inequality? Is there a way to change that? Is there a way to redistribute the wealth to make the world more equitable? Do we want to? Is it fair? And then if we want to look at all the forms of stratification, all the ways we divide into groups that are associated with likelihood to be in poverty. Again, if you think about variables associated with it, race, non-whites have historically been subjugated and blocked access. Biological sex, women have historically been at blocked access. Based upon your ethnicity, Mexicans in America have received tons of stigma and historically been blocked access. Poor people in poor countries that don't have access to rise up the social class ladder. Political governments in which the government has the power and only those who, have networks in the government. If you look at like people from China, like where I live in Ohio, like you always have very wealthy Chinese people that send their kids over here, and their kids have brand new $750, BMWs, and just living it up while there's some poor kid in China. Well, why is that? It's supposed to be a communist state. But again, I don't think the poor Chinese realize how well the kids of the rich Chinese live in America when they come over here. If they did, I'm sure they'd have some kind of a social revolution. When it comes to economics of capitalism says domination of those in power, is that the goal of society? Is it all about power? Is capitalism all about power? One group dominating another group? Is that really what we care about? Is that really what's important? World domination of the economic system? Or is life about more than that? Again, these are just questions we should ask. And then, is the society that we're seeing now the effect of rapid globalization? I mean, but again, I don't think it's rapid. I mean, yes, in the sense that now we have mega cruise ships and stuff and airplanes that we didn't have before, but we've always had, the countries interacting with each other, just not on this rate. But again, even though we're globalized now, we've still had societies going back for years, and large societies, but just not to the population that we have in modern times. So again, rapid globalization means population increases. Again, it only took us 100 years to kill the entire planet and cause global warming. That's basically how long we've been kicking out stuff out of our smokestacks. About 150 years since the steam engine. So again, we got to ask questions. Is this really the best world that we're living in? Or is this just us having to adapt with the rapid globalization? Okay. So, inequality exists. If you want evidence for it, just again, look at the demography, look at the income statistics from country to country, look at the health statistics from country to country. Again, how long do people live from country to country? Is it fair? And you will see that there is a great disparity between the groups. Now, again, is that the way we want it? Should there be some form of social change? Should we build like symbolic interactionism, construct a different kind of society that doesn't kill the planet and result in a bunch of children starving while somebody else has like 10 houses, each one of them worth $60 million. And then they're just hopping on spaceships and going in outer space while some kid is starving. I mean, again, is that the society we want? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. It's not for me to judge. But again, it's just something to be thinking about, as we always should be in sociology. Okay, thank you again for listening and have a great day.